So in this video, we're going to take a look at how we can actually decompile the source code of our APK files. So in order to do this, we're going to use three different tools, really. We're going to use dex2jar, we're going to use Apk Tool, and we're going to use jadex. And I'm going to demonstrate what each of these tools can do and what information we can gather from them and some of the relationships between the different decompilations that we get. So we'll start off with dex2jar. I'm going to go into my insecure bank directory. And inside of here, we have the APK for the application. Now, if you pulled the APK like we did in the last video, you can also use that base APK. I'm just using this one for simplicity because it's available and ready for us. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to pull it over to dex2jar and paste it into the same directory as dex2jar. From here, I'm going to go into my command prompt, and I'm going to go into this directory here. So I'm just going to cd into that directory. And let me just clear the command prompt so that it's easier to see what we're doing from here. So in order to decompile this app, we're going to use the following command. We're going to say d2j-dex2jar.bat-f insecure bank v2.apk. So this is the name of the APK file, and then this is the actual command to generate the jar file. When I run this, you'll see it will work to generate the jar file associated with this APK. Then after a minute or so, it will be able to generate the actual jar file. So you can see here, this is the jar file that is associated with it. From here, we can open up this jar file using jadex. So I'm going to go up one directory into my jadex directory. I'm going to run the jadex GUI.bat. This will launch the jadex GUI program. And then from here, we just need to navigate to where our jar file is. You see in mine, I have it already at that directory. So I could just go ahead and open up this jar file. And after, a minute or so of processing, it will give us the source code for our jar file. And here's the source code. So this is a very useful thing to be able to have, because you'll see here, if I go into the com package, android.insecurebank v2, this is all of the code that's associated with our insecure bank app. So you can see that this code is very similar to Java code. Most of this is exceptionally easy to read and understand if you know a little bit of Java and Android development. So this makes it very easy for us to understand exactly what the program is doing. And you'll see that there's a lot of power that we can get out of this in terms of analyzing, gathering information, and actually exploiting this application. Now, I just want to give you a few pieces of intuition behind the different things that are stored inside of here. You'll find the source code for the application in the same path as the package name. So like com.android.insecurebank v2. This is all the code associated with the insecure bank app. You'll see here that there's other packages. There's Android support, and there's Google Ads and GMS. These are built-in packages that are programmed by third parties, in this case, Google. So we don't really need to worry about any of this because this is all code that's written by Google. It's out of scope of our bug bounty in this case. So we only really want to be looking at the stuff associated with Insecure Bank v2. And from here, we can take a look at all sorts of different things, right? Like login activity is clearly the activity that handles the login. So we can take a look at this and see, for instance, where it fills the data from when we press on that fill data button. We can see generally what happens on create. We can see what happens when we try to perform the actual login. We can see each of those components inside of this source code. So that's generally something that we're able to do here. So from this, let's take a look at the other type of decompilation, which would be using our APK tool. So go back to the pen test. I'm going to make another copy of our APK file. I'm going to place it in the same directory as my APK tool. From here, I'm going to cd out to that directory, and I'm going to run apk tool.bat d, and then the name of the APK file. So the D stands for decompile. So that's going to go through and it's going to actually decompile our insecure bank app. So we'll just give this a minute to finish off the decompilation process, and then we'll see what the results are. When we actually do this, it's going to give us essentially an assembly version of our code rather than the Java code itself. And you'll see that this has a lot of benefit to us in a lot of different ways. We'll actually demonstrate ways that we can utilize this assembly code. One of the key things that I want to point out is that the assembly code as well as the jar code are associated with each other. And you can actually see that in JADX. You'll see that there's this tab for Smalley code, and you can see that we can translate this code also into Smalley, which is the assembly language that's being used. So when we take a look at what's given to us through the APK tool, we'll see a few important pieces here. The Android manifest is something that we might want to take a look at. It's an XML file that generally contains a lot of information about the actual app itself. So let me go ahead and open this up for you just to demonstrate what this looks like. So you can see here it has a whole bunch of different pieces of information. It tells you what permissions the app uses. It tells you about intents and activities and content providers. These are all different things that we might be able to leverage in exploits. You'll actually see that it's easier to gather this information through a tool like Drozer, which we'll take a look at in the next video. They will be able to actually parse this manifest into something that's very easy for us to understand. So if you want to do it the manual way, you can do it through the Android manifest file that's decompiled here. Otherwise, we typically tend to use tools like Drozer to do this sort of thing instead. So that's just something that I wanted to mention there. The other important part here is the Smalley files. So inside of the Smalley files, we have, the Smalley code that corresponds to each of these Java files. So for instance, underneath, say, do login, for instance, we have a whole bunch of code and a whole bunch of different functions. And what we're able to do is we're able to take a look at each of these different functions through the assembly code instead. And this generally works out nice for us. For instance, if I go to post login, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of information here that we failed to decompile this. It looks like this didn't decompile all that easily. So if I want to actually take a look at that code, alternatively, I can take a look at the Smalley code that was provided here. So if I go to post login, I can open this one up in Notepad. And you can see here we can get the actual assembly code that's associated with it directly. So for instance, if I pick like one of these functions here, like this one here, for instance, I would be able to actually view this function inside of here as well. So you can see that's the function call it looks like, and then this is the actual method here. So although it helps to be able to read this assembly code, it's not necessarily required. I'm going to walk through like a few things that we can do with this in later videos, but I'll try my best to explain every component that we're utilizing as we're utilizing it. So you can see that we can get that code through here, but we can also get it through here, right? The main difference is that when we make changes here, it's a lot easier for us to recompile, because what happens is with the APK tool, what we can do is we can say APK tool B insecure bank v2. And what this will do is it will actually rebuild the APK for us. So when we make changes to the actual jar file, it's a bit harder to recompile and rebuild that. Whereas if we make changes to the Smalley directly, then it will be a lot easier to rebuild it. So that's just the main things that we want to keep in mind with APK tool. And that generally gives you a good picture of how you can actually go about decompiling APK files. So from here, you'll be able to decompile them, read the Java code, and read the Smalley code.